The war had lasted 3 months. 3 months since the Crithian Imperium's vast armada had arrived at the edge of human space, demanding immediate and unconditional surrender. 3 months since humanity had politely declined. 3 months of brutal, grinding warfare across a dozen star systems. Now, Fleet Admiral Carthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Divine Retribution, watching the tactical display with growing frustration. The human fleet was surrounded, outnumbered 5-1. Their supply lines cut, their reinforcements weeks away. By every military doctrine in the galaxy, they should surrender, said the communication again. Carthal ordered, his mandibles clicking with irritation. Surely their commander sees reason now. The view screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable. Captain Maria Santos sat in the command chair, her uniform rumpled, a coffee cup in one hand, and an expression of mild amusement on her face. "Admiral Carthal," she said pleasantly. "Third surrender demand this week. You're getting persistent." Carthal's 4 eyes narrowed. "Captain Santos, I respect you as a warrior. You have fought well. But this is over. You are surrounded, outnumbered, out of options. I offer you honorable terms. Surrender your vessels, and your crews will be treated as prisoners of war according to Galactic Convention. Refuse, and I will destroy every ship in your fleet." Maria took a sip of her coffee. "So my options are surrender or die." "Precisely, Admiral." Maria's smile widened. "Those are the same thing." Carthal paused. His translator must have malfunctioned. "I do not understand. Surrender means survival. Death means... I know what death means, Admiral." Maria set down her coffee. "But you don't understand what surrender means. Not to humans. It means you lay down your arms. Stop fighting. Accept defeat." "See, that's where you're wrong." Maria stood, walking closer to the view screen. "Surrender doesn't mean we stop fighting. It means we start fighting differently. And that's when things get really ugly." Carthal's confusion deepened. "You speak in riddles. Let me tell you a story, Admiral. A history lesson?" Maria's expression grew serious. 200 years ago, there was a country on Earth called Vietnam. Small country, agricultural, poor, and they were invaded by the most powerful military on the planet. The invaders had superior technology, air superiority, naval dominance, everything. By every military metric, Vietnam should have surrendered immediately. And did they? Carthal asked, though he suspected the answer. They fought for 20 years. Used guerrilla tactics, booby traps, tunnels, psychological warfare. They turned their weakness into strength. The superior force lost 58,000 soldiers and eventually withdrew. Not because they were beaten militarily, but because they couldn't break the enemy's will. One example? World War II, Japan. After 2 atomic bombs, weapons that could level entire cities, the Japanese military still had factions that wanted to keep fighting. The emperor had to record a surrender message in secret because officers would have stopped him. Maria continued pacing. Afghanistan. Multiple empires tried to conquer it. The British Empire, the Soviet Union, all failed. Not because Afghanistan had better weapons, but because the people refused to accept defeat. Your point, Captain? My point, Admiral, is that humans don't know how to surrender. It's not in our programming. You can destroy our ships, occupy our planets, kill our soldiers. But you can't make us stop fighting. We'll just change tactics. Carthal's posture shifted. You would continue resistance. After military defeat, resistance. Maria laughed. Admiral, resistance is what we do before things get serious. Let me tell you what happens if you defeat this fleet and occupy human space. She held up one finger. First, you'll take our planets easily enough. We'll evacuate who we can, destroy what we can't. You'll plant your flag, set up your administration. A second finger. Then the insurgency starts. Every human world you occupy will become a nightmare. Bombs in marketplaces, snipers picking off your officers, supply convoys ambushed. Your soldiers won't be able to tell civilians from fighters because they're the same people. Third finger. Your occupation forces will need more troops, more resources, more ships. You'll be hemorrhaging resources trying to hold territory while human resistance cells coordinate across dozens of worlds. Fourth finger. Then the psychological warfare begins. Humans are creative, Admiral. We'll make your soldiers afraid to sleep, afraid to eat, afraid to trust their own allies. We invented 1,000 ways to break enemy morale, and we'll use every single one. Fifth finger, and now her hand was a fist. And eventually, your own people will ask why they're dying for planets that cost more to hold than they're worth. Why their sons and daughters are coming home in body bags for a war that never ends. And your empire will tear itself apart from the inside. Carthal was silent. You want to know the difference between humans and every other species you've conquered. Maria's voice was cold now. Other species have a breaking point, a moment where they calculate the cost and surrender. Humans don't have that switch. We don't know when to quit. It's a flaw, really. We should be more rational. But we're not. This is madness, Carthol said quietly. Probably, Maria agreed. But it's human madness. We wrote epics about losing battles. Our greatest heroes are people who fought hopeless causes. We celebrate last stands, doomed defenses, Pyrrhic victories. We have a phrase of death before dishonor. We mean it literally. She leaned closer to the screen. So yes, Admiral, you can destroy this fleet. You'll win this battle. But you won't win the war. Because the war won't end ever. We'll fight you for generations. We'll teach our children to fight you. We'll turn every planet you occupy into a graveyard for your soldiers. And if I simply exterminate your species. Carthol's voice was sharp. Orbital bombardment. Total annihilation. Maria's smile returned, but it was terrible. Then you'll prove to every species in the galaxy that the Crithian Imperium commits genocide. The other powers won't accept that. You'll face sanctions, embargoes, possibly war. And you'll have done all of that to defeat a species that just wanted to be left alone. She paused. Plus, Admiral, you won't get all of us. Some humans will survive. Hidden colonies, deep space stations, and those survivors will spend the rest of their existence hunting your species. Every Crithian ship, every colony, every outpost will be a target. Will become what you fear most, an enemy with nothing left to lose. The bridge was silent except for the hum of ship systems. There's a term from human history, Maria said softly. Mutually assured destruction. It means that if you destroy us, we'll make certain you destroy yourselves in the process. Not because we can win, but because we'll make victory cost more than you can afford to pay. Carthol stared at the human captain. In his 40 years of military service, he had accepted the surrender of 17 species. All of them had been rational. All of them had calculated the odds and chosen survival over annihilation. He was beginning to understand that humans didn't think that way. You are bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked confidence. Aim I. Maria walked back to her command chair. Tell me, Admiral, how many of your soldiers are willing to die occupying human worlds? How many ships can you afford to lose in endless insurgencies? How long can your empire sustain a war against an enemy that refuses to accept defeat? She sat down, picked up her coffee. I'm not bluffing, Admiral. I'm giving you intelligence assessment. Hard data. If you destroy this fleet, you win a battle and start an endless war. If you withdraw, you go home with your forces intact and find someone else to conquer. Someone more reasonable. The Imperium does not retreat. Then the Imperium is about to learn a very expensive lesson about fighting humans. Maria's expression softened slightly. Admiral, I actually respect you. You're a professional. You follow the rules of war. You offered honorable terms. In another universe, we might have been allies, but I know my species. If I surrender this fleet, the politicians might negotiate a peace. And maybe that peace lasts a generation. But eventually, some human somewhere will decide they've had enough of Crithian rule. And they'll resist. And others will join. And 50 years from now, your grandchildren will be fighting my grandchildren in a war that neither of us started, but that won't end. She leaned forward. So I'm giving you a choice, Admiral. A real choice. Walk away from this battle. Tell your Imperium that humans aren't worth the cost. Find easier prey. Or commit to a forever war against a species that literally wrote the book on asymmetric warfare and guerrilla tactics. Carthol looked at his tactical display. 5-to-1 numerical advantage. Total strategic superiority. By every military metric, this should be simple. But Captain Santos wasn't looking at military metrics. She was looking at history, at culture, at the fundamental nature of her species. And she was absolutely serious. You would truly never surrender, he said. Not even to save your own lives. Wad surrender to save others, Maria corrected. Hostages, civilians, innocents, we value life, Admiral. But our own lives in the service of freedom. Those we'll throw away without hesitation if it means denying victory to someone who wants to enslave us. She finished her coffee. So, what's it going to be? A battle you'll win and a war you'll lose. Or the wisdom to walk away from a bad situation? The bridge of the divine retribution was silent for a full minute. Then Carthol spoke. Helm, set course for the border. Full retreat. His officers stared at him in shock. Admiral, his second in command, asked. We have them surrounded. Exactly. Carthol interrupted. We have them surrounded, and they don't care. That species fights wars that last generations over principles we can barely understand. They celebrate defeats like victories. They honor soldiers who die in losing causes. He looked at the view screen where Captain Santos sat calmly. I will not sacrifice the Imperium's future fighting an enemy that sees surrender and death as the same thing. On the human flagship, Maria Santos watched the Crithian fleet begin to turn away. Her first officer approached. "Captain, they're withdrawing." We won." "We didn't win," Maria said quietly. "We just convinced them that beating us wasn't worth the cost." She stood, looking at the stars. "That's the only way humans know how to win impossible fights. We make victory too expensive to achieve. And if they'd called our bluff..." Maria looked at her officer, and her expression was ancient and tired. "Lieutenant, it wasn't a bluff. Everything I told him was true. If they destroyed this fleet, the war would have just begun. And it would never ever end." She walked toward her ready room. "Send word to Fleet Command. The Crithians are withdrawing. Recommend we avoid contact with the Imperium for at least a generation. Let them conquer someone more reasonable. And if they come back?" Maria paused at the door. "Then we'll have the same conversation again. And every time, we'll give them the same choice: walk away or fight forever." She smiled grimly. "Eventually, every species learns the same lesson about humans." "What lesson, Captain?" "That surrender isn't our weakness. It's our line in the sand, the one thing we will never, ever do." She looked back at the stars where the Crithian fleet was disappearing into FTL. "And that makes us either the bravest species in the galaxy, or the most dangerously insane." "Which one are we, Mom?" Captain Maria Santos smiled. "Yes,